Welcome. It's hashtag Webinar Wednesday. I'm Doug Sesserman, privileged to serve as the CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University. I'm sitting here in my virtual office in New York City. It's noon Eastern time, and we're joined by Professor Guy Ben-Porat in Israel, where it's 7 p.m. This webinar is called for 30 minutes. It's about navigating Israel's future. And we thank all of you for registering. We had record registration. More than 750 people signed up for this webinar. I just want to start with a somber note. Obviously, just a few days ago, we received some terrible information. And if we could, I just want to acknowledge the 6 fallen. Carmel Gott, Eden Yerushalmi, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Alexander Lobanoff, Almog Sorosi, and Master Sergeant Ori Darnino. May their memories be for a blessing. Thank you. Before we begin, I just want to thank the staff that works so hard in New York and around the country. Lenore Levine, the Director of Events and Experiences, Cheryl Korlitz, Blair Kahana, Tali Goldshaft, and Dana Ben-Benin, who is our liaison in Israel. We are joined today by the most popular panelist we have in all of our webinars, Professor Guy Ben-Porat. He is the immediate past chair of the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and his expertise is in comparative politics and public policy. He's the co-author of Policing Citizens, Minority Policy in Israel, and the author of several other books, including Between State and Synagogue, The Secularization of Contemporary Israel. That book won the Yonatan Shapiro Award for Best Book in Israel Studies from the Association of Israel Studies and the Gideon Doron Best Book Award from the Israeli Political Science Association. Professor Ben-Porat received his BA in Political Science and Psychology from Tel Aviv University and did his PhD in the States in Political Science at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. I also have the pleasure of calling him a good friend. So Guy, welcome to the webinar on navigating Israel's future.
Thank you, Doug. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where to start, but I just wanted to send a message to everybody that registered, and I can see our numbers growing. If you have a question during this webinar, just click on the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get these questions to Guy as he's discussing. Why don't we start, Guy, with the most recent events, the ceasefire deal and why it fell apart, and then the protests that are currently taking place?
So maybe start with the ceasefire, which many of the details are unknown because they're doing behind closed doors. So we don't know the exact details. What we do know, I think, in general terms, is that what's on the table is a proposal that will end the war in Gaza, at least for the near term. In return, hostages will be released. And the other things are still to be debated. And what happened on Saturday has sparked lots of rage because the feeling was that had the deal been struck earlier, had the government been more committed to achieving this deal, maybe these lives would have been spared. So there are 2 major debates that are intertwined. One is about should the war in Gaza end and whether the continuation of the war is doing any good for Israel, or is it actually a losing battle at this point? And secondly, what price should be paid for the release of the hostages? So far, some were saved by military operations, but it appears that military operations will not be able to save the majority of them. Rather, many are being killed in military attempts to save them, which is obvious in the difficulties of operating in such a tense environment. So I think even the military has been hinting that while it will do its best to rescue the hostages, it'll have to be a political deal that will release them.
Hmm. I think we've prepared a map that maybe we'll show so you can help educate the audience on these corridors that are talked about. We're looking at a map of Gaza and what's referred to as the Netzarim corridor and also the Philadelphia corridor. The Netzarim is relatively a recent phenomenon. The Philadelphia corridor existed for 26 years from 1979 to 2005. Can you explain a little bit the purpose of these corridors
Yeah, I
and then
can try. So,
how they're a deal point that's making the ceasefire very problematic?
so from the Hamas point of view or demands, Israel has to end the war by withdrawing from Gaza, all its forces. It appeared that Israel, through the US and the other mediators, has in principle agreed to these issues. But recently, there were other demands from Israel that seem to make getting to a deal much more difficult. So the Netzarim corridor, which is in the northern part of Gaza, basically separates the northern areas of Gaza from which population was driven south. And what Israel wants is to have control of people returning to the north of the Gaza Strip. So people that will come back to the north of Gaza have to go through some checkpoints to make sure they're not Hamas militants, they don't carry weapons, etc. That's one corridor. This seems to be the least or the more minor demand that Israel might be more willing to give up on. The Philadelphia corridor is more complex. So this is the border between Egypt and Gaza, from which smuggling of arms went through all these years. So the argument is, which should be taken seriously, is that if Israel does not control this corridor, then the Hamas will be able to rearm itself very quickly. Um, Having said that, there are several problems with this corridor. First, that if you think in terms of a border, you have your side and the other side. What's going to happen here is that it's going to have to be on one side with Palestinians on their back, facing the Egyptians. So you're talking about a corridor which, in terms of width, is about 100 feet, maybe, about 10 miles in length. So if
Yeah,
you
I
want to
think
defend
I
100
read
feet,
something that it was maybe 100 yards, more than 100 feet, but a very narrow corridor. Yeah.
the corridor itself is about, I think, 50 feet, I think. Well, but that's really details. It's still a very narrow area. To defend it, you might become a sitting duck. And in the past, when Israel was on the Rafah border, there were some incidents in which soldiers have been killed. So, and you can, of course, dig tunnels under, which will happen. So, how deep inside in Gaza you want to go? Secondly, uh, if you don't have the Egyptians' cooperation, it'll be very difficult to defend this border. So, there's a strategic question here whether Israel should keep this corridor. And there's a big argument. I mean, military thinks that it shouldn't, or that it could be withdraw and enter occasionally if there's information what's happening. And then there's the major question about the hostages. If Israel demands, insists on holding the Philadelphia corridor, then the hostage deal might not happen. It's a question of priorities. Do you want to save 100 hostages, out of them maybe 50, 60 still alive, we hope, or you're sacrificing them for holding this border? That is the moral question here. That is the narrow moral question.
So we're getting a good question from Eugene Gorin. He's asking, is there an alternative to securing the Philadelphia corridor besides IDF presence? And then he's also asking, why is Netanyahu now adding this when it didn't seem to be a key issue before?
So these are actually two separate questions. Are there options? Well, there always are options. The question is, how good are they? One option which has been mentioned, which is that the Egyptians on their side will create a barrier to prevent tunnels with American support, funding, oversight, with Israeli oversight. There were some options mentioned. I'm not sure how far it went. The other option
Why
is,
wouldn't that be acceptable to Netanyahu if the Americans are involved in oh, defending or policing this corridor on the Egyptian side?
that actually pertains to the second question. I think we always need to think of the domestic politics effect on foreign policy. Netanyahu's government has a very narrow majority, which rests on the support of the extreme right parties. And these parties have made it clear to Netanyahu that if he withdraws from the Philadelphia corridor, they will leave the coalition and break the government apart. So there's a political dimension here which has been mentioned. The extreme right in the government is adamant against any withdrawal from Gaza. Some of them hold even a dream of rebuilding settlements in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the domestic politics here, which affects the foreign policy as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Talk a little bit about the Netzarim. I read that it's about 4 miles long and a mile or so wide. It's a much wider corridor than Philadelphia.
It is. Netzarim used to be a settlement before the Israeli withdrawal, and the corridor was actually the road from Israel to the settlement. That was the road that led there. Again, the purpose of this corridor is to prevent the return of Hamas from the south to the north. How effective will that be? Very questionable. I mean, can a corridor prevent that? And again, a corridor means having IDF soldiers on the ground, exposed to danger, and again, risking the hostage deal. That is the main issue there.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions right now. One's from Luciano Kolodny, who's a wonderful guy and one of our Zinn fellows. He's asking that if Israel agreed to these terms not to have the corridor, isn't it almost guaranteed that 10-7 could repeat itself?
I think we need to look at the bigger picture here. And when you make decisions on policies, you have to weigh all the options that are available and also the wider consequences. At the moment, Israel is involved in a war in the north, in France in the east, in an Iranian threat, in a Yemenite threat. All this creates lots of pressure in Israel. We have an army that's been in a war for 11 months, which has been draining its resources, which has been very much intensive. So we need to make a choice. Now, the October 7th has happened because there was no military on the border, where it should have been. So a similar event, I think, could be prevented by the simple act of having soldiers on the border. Then again, there's the hostage question. You take risks to save people who were deserted by their country, who has created this situation and now owes them to bring them back. So that's, again, a moral question. So if you look at the big picture here of what's at stake, it's not without risks. But again, I think a deal at this moment, which will enable Israel to end the war in Gaza for the time being, move its resources to the north. We have about 100,000 people who have left their homes in the north because of the threat of Hezbollah. We have to deal with that. 11 months.
Let's move to the north in just a second, but let's stay on the south.
Okay.
What would be wrong with sort of an international peacekeeping force led by the Americans, let's say, on the Egyptian side with the Egyptians? Couldn't that militarily do the job that Israel needs?
I think it will be the best option available. You always want to have your own forces do the job, obviously. You don't want to rely on other foreign forces, which you could also say interest might change. The US might decide to withdraw. Egyptians might not cooperate. There are risks here. So obviously, ideally, you would want to do the job yourself. Having said that, with all things that are at stake here, this would be the best option available at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Guy. Let's now move up north to the threat on the northern border with Lebanon and the latest in terms of your understanding.
So these two things are intertwined. The Hezbollah has joined the war in order to put more pressure on Israel. It's a relatively, again, the word relatively is problematic here, but it's a relatively low intense war. So it's kept to the northern part of Israel. Although Hezbollah can fire also to the center of Israel, it has the firepower. And what Israel did was to evacuate citizens from their homes for about 10 months now. Now, Israel has difficulty on fighting on two fronts. There are more than two. There are three fronts, actually. You have the West Bank, which is also now escalating. So you have a small military, relatively, which has been fighting for 11 months now. So in order to take care of the North, you need to finish the war at the South. And the longer you wait, the more difficult it will be. So ideally, if Israel is able to finish the war in the South, bring forces up north, create some pressure there, maybe have a deal, again, a broker deal by the US and the Europeans, having Hezbollah withdraw north, maybe that could bring some peace with a small p to the area.
Okay. Give us some optimism. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the day after. What would a best case scenario look like for the war concluding, and then how the geography would look?
I think before the optimism, we need to talk about the political situation. And I think that the divide now in Israel, and we've been on the streets demonstrating now Israelis for almost 4 years. It began with anti-corruption demonstrations. And I want to remind you that Netanyahu is still facing charges of corruption in the court. It has not ended yet. Then came the demonstration against the attempt to change the legal system, which was perceived by many as a fight against or for democracy. And now we have the war. So I think this division has been very, very important to explain what's happening here. What happened when the war began was, on the one hand, a very strong coming out of a civil society that came out to volunteer in the fields, in the military, in civil society. So you saw a lot of activity that brought some optimism. A society that is able to come together, maybe coming in place of a government which has failed us again and again and again. So you had people doing the job of the government. And that brought some optimism. After 11 months of war, that waned down, obviously. People have become tired politically and many other issues. So it's very hard to stay optimistic at the moment. There is some hope in the sense of society that came together, that was willing to fight for its cause, that was willing to sacrifice. And when there's a fight, there's life, as we say here.
The national anthem is Hatikva, right? So we can't give up hope.
Yeah.
We're getting a really good question from Rabbi Sanford Olshansky. He's asking that you haven't really mentioned Iran yet.
Yeah.
So can you just speak to whether or not Israel can really be safe if there aren't concessions made with Iran?
Thank you for the question. I think it goes to what I said before about strategy. For many years, Netanyahu has placed Iran as the major danger to Israel. In the last weeks, it became the Philadelphia corridor. And I think that's when you have to look from a very narrow perspective on a minor issue into the major question. And I think if Iran is indeed the major threat to Israel, then what is at stake here is building a coalition, which is the US, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, the Gulf countries, which under certain terms could provide Israel with a belt, against Iran, with a defensive shield against Iran. So what we need now in Israel are several things. First, to keep ourselves focused on the alignment with the US. And the fighting with the US government, of the Israeli government, has been completely nonsensical. So that's one priority. Second is to maintain the coalition with the moderate Arab countries, with Egypt, for example, with Saudi Arabia. And for that, Israel has to make some concessions towards the Palestinians. Talk about the day after, what's going to happen here. So as the war in Gaza prolongs, we are losing on all these fronts. Support in the world, support of the moderate Arab countries. So again, I'm not discounting the importance of the Philadelphia corridor. But if you look at the wider picture, the bigger picture, we might be losing elsewhere much bigger losses. That's where I think we need to keep our focus on.
Okay. We're also getting some questions from P. Friedman and others about exchange, hostage release, the numbers in the 100 to thousands of Palestinians that might be in prison. How does that work, and how should we think about those kinds of disproportional numbers from a moral standpoint, et cetera?
We've been used to that for years. We've been paying high prices for many years. And I'm not sure we can now go back and, do anything else. Again, from my perspective, and, people might dispute that, I think we owe these people so much, people that are captive in Gaza. I think we deserted them on October 7th. The country has, in some sense, betrayed them, should have protected those people, those young women soldiers that were without arms and were captured by the Hamas, people in the kibbutzim who were left unprotected. So I think we have a big debt to these people. And as far as I'm concerned, we can pay a high price for that, because to bring those people back home is for me more important than keeping those people in prison. And I'm aware of the moral hazard here, and it doesn't make me happy to release murderers from jail. But I think, again, there's a contract between people and the state. Okay, the state asks people to sacrifice. People do sacrifice. They lived across the border. They suffered years from bombardment from Gaza. They risked their life. And at the moment of truth, we betrayed them. And if we break that contract, it has going to be such a devastating effect on Israeli society. We could never ask people again to sacrifice. What are you going to tell the mother of a soldier who will ask you, if my daughter will be captured, will you do everything you can to release her? And I think you can't, there's no price to that. So of course the releasing of murderers is difficult. And I can't, say it's not. But again, looking at the big picture about the contract we have with our people, to bringing those people back home, and we could have saved those 6 people. I think what was said in the demonstration was, we asked for their forgiveness. We could have saved you, and we didn't. And I think that's what we should keep our focus on.
Okay, we're getting a good question. We're almost out of time, so we'll need to wrap up. But David Levine's asking really about the U.S. election. So we've got elections in November. Do you think the U.S. relationship with Israel changes at all if it's Harris versus Trump?
First, I think that Joe Biden showed remarkable support for Israel. And despite the fact that the government of Israel has not given back the respect he deserves, I think people of Israel do have respect for him. I think at least 3 times he stepped up. He brought American troops to the shores of Israel. He made threats that may have prevented regional war here. So I think we have a huge debt to Joe Biden. I think Kamala Harris will also be supportive of Israel, but might also have greater demands of Israel, which is not a bad thing, actually. I think in order to have Israel, I think the U.S. also has interest here. Building this coalition is in American interest. And for many years, Israel has been able to be bipartisan in its support in the U.S. And in recent years, Israel's inclination towards the Republicans has been a mistake strategically because we lost support among the Democrats. And we can't afford that. I think we need to have the Israeli-American alignment as a central objective of our strategy. And in
Yeah.
that sense, I think that the US elections, if people are counting on Trump to do things otherwise, I think that's a mistake. I think, again, the big picture here is having a US-Israel alignment with the moderate Arab countries, and that's the best shield against Iran. All other things are complete nonsense.
Okay. We're going to wrap up, but Meryl Roth is asking a really good question. She's talking about the world still talking about and pushing for a two-state solution. Um, how realistic do you think a plan for that is in the near-term horizon?
I think that October 7th has traumatized Israelis. And I always tell my colleagues here in the recent year that I think as political scientists, we haven't been taking enough account of how much fear affects people. And I think that Israel at the moment are very much afraid. They're insecure. And so are Palestinians, by the way. So I think in the short term, we need to stabilize things. I think in the short term, we need to work on not making things worse. But again, if we are thinking of the alignment of the US, the moderate countries in Israel, eventually, this will have to come up with some Palestinian resolution. I think what the mistake has been for the past years, ignoring the Palestinians, of going over their heads, making deals with the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and saying, well, the Palestinians will sometimes solve it. No, that's a major issue. And if I may have one more point of optimism, Doug, which I did think about when we talked, of the Negev region. And I think for many years now, I've been working on the issues between Arabs and Jews in Israel. And what happened in the Bedouin communities on October 7th has been, I think, a major change which we haven't really utilized. We haven't really made something positive. Bedouins who are Arab citizens were kidnapped, were murdered by Hamas. Some came out to help Israeli Jews and rescue them. And there is, I think, a potential here for collaboration. So on the one hand, these Bedouins feel that, Hamas is definitely not what we're expecting. We are in Israel. We are citizens of a second, third degree, but we insist on our being here. There was in Rahat, a Bedouin town, there was a center for distributing food for the needed during the war, Jews and Arabs. And I think that there's so much potential here for bringing them into Israeli society. And if there's a sense of optimism, it's this thing that we still haven't captured, but really should keep our eyes on, of having, I mean, everyone was expecting that Arabs of Israel, Arab citizens here will join the fight. The Israeli extreme right was even hoping for that, but they haven't. They have not joined it, which means that they see themselves as part of Israel. And we really should work on that. That's, I think, is essential for our future.
Well, a Jewish state with a shared society.
Exactly.
That sounds perfect. Maybe just one last final comment on what you believe the role of the university has, not just as 20,000 students strong and 3 campuses and the largest employer in the Negev region, but its role in the future of Israel. Just a couple comments.
Let me say first that we've gone through a horrible year. I mean, I can't describe. I mean, I've been to American campuses, and I think you really can't grasp. But we walk around campus. There are pictures of kidnapped and dead. We have students who lost their loved ones, who were evacuated. I don't think we still account for the traumas people are going to come back with from this war. So I think on that, it's a huge issue just to bring things back to normal. Having Arabs and Jews study here, develop our programs, think about the future. And I think, this generation of young people who are actually my children's age have been so much from the coronavirus to this war, We had 5 years which generation has been, devastated. And still, I see them and I salute them. These people, we always talk about, this generation, they're all, it's all about, video games and social media. And, you think, wow, these young people are just amazing. And I think we owe them so much for being so amazing.
Yeah, even BGU president, Professor Daniel Shamovitz, and commenting about this generation, he said it was tested and they proved themselves to be one of the great generations in Israel's history.
I
Maybe
think we owe them an apology. I think, people of my generation always say, yeah, these young people, I think we owe them an apology. I mean, they came out and, they were amazing, resilient and committed.
yeah.
If there's hope, it's them.
So Ben-Gurion said that the future of Israel is going to be in the Negev, 60% of the land, less than 10% of the population. And he also said it would be in the Negev that Israel would be tested, and how prophetic a statement that is. Thank you all for joining this webinar. We have some upcoming programming we just want to highlight. The first is on September 22nd in New York City. We're kicking off our annual meeting with a benefit called One Day, featuring Matisyahu and honoring our outgoing board chair for his 4 years of service, Gary Debody. All you have to do is take out your phone, take a picture of that QR code, and register for the event. We'd love to see you there. The second thing we have coming up is a reflection program 1 year later on October 7th. Our event will feature BGU President Professor Daniel Shamovitz, and will actually be on October 6th, also at noon Eastern Time. And if you love the work here at Ben-Gurion University and Americans for Ben-Gurion University, if you'd like to support our efforts, I think we have another slide. You could click on this QR code and send a donation if you'd like. We appreciate that. It takes money to do programming like this. Okay, so David Ben-Gurion, the founder, first prime minister, and person I call the #2 Jew all time, said that in Israel, in order to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. And this is a time when we need to believe in those miracles. And personally, I think Professor Guy Ben-Porat is one of those miracles. Thank him for his 9 webinar appearances and for his commitment to the state, and also the volunteerism that you mentioned you were doing in the fields, and to the students and faculty and administration of the university. If you haven't been to Israel recently, this next year would be a good one to go. And when you go visit Israel, go visit the South. And you haven't really seen the South until you spend time at Ben-Gurion University, and we'd be happy to show you any of our 3 campuses in Beersheba, Sde Boker, or Eilat, or all 3 of them. Make the trip all about BGU in the Negev. So take care, be safe, and have some really happy high holidays that are just around the corner. Thank you.